Some films were harmed in the making of this podcast. From Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, and the Palatial FYC Studios, you're listening to All Things Considered,
the podcast where we ask you to consider all things as opposed to bringing you a single film for your consideration. I'm your host, Dustin Friesenhan.
And I'm Mike Josic. We'd like to give a shout out to anybody catching the show on iHeartRadio, Stitcher, YouTube, Google Play, and if you catch the show off of iTunes, streaming, or download, while you're there, we'd super appreciate it if you subscribed and rated and reviewed the show. Helps with the algorithms, getting the show into the eyes and ears of folks who may want to see or hear the show but don't have an opportunity to because Apple's just not showing it to them. That was terrible.
That's okay, pandering is for chumps anyway.
If you're a regular listener to the podcast, welcome back. If this is your first time, beware, spoilers ahead. As we said on our last episode, this week we are going to be covering a film which is celebrating its 10th anniversary. I believe March 6th was its original release date. And it's a movie both Dustin and I were kind of interested in revisiting. And we thought we'd give it a watch, decide whether we thought it held up. And that movie is Zack Snyder's 2009 adaptation of Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons' Watchmen.
AKA that really long superhero film where if the heroes wanted to save more people, they really should have just stayed at home.
Now, what we didn't mention last week was that we have a guest with us joining us for this conversation, and that guest is Eric Nash, one of the co-hosts of the Watchmen Minute. Eric, how you doing?
Hey guys, I'm glad to be here.
I wondered what you might have thought of that dummery that Dustin just...
Yeah. It's a very good point that I think he makes in it.
Now, the Watchmen Minute, for anybody who doesn't know about the Minute podcasts, I wondered if you can give like a really quick spiel of what your podcast was about.
Yeah, Watchmen Minute came about because prior to it, there were maybe roughly 100 other podcasts, roughly, I think is when we got in there, and there's now 125 plus as well, Movies by Minutes podcasts. And they generally take the first minute of the movie. Yeah, the host and sometimes guests watch that first minute, not part of the episode that goes out. But then the discussion of that first minute is the first episode, and it continues from there. Second and third episode onward throughout the whole movie. Usually, every now and then there's been some people have chosen to discontinue for one reason or another, but others pick up where they left off, but create a new one that, such as there's the infamous Jaws. two different shows that have done Jaws, but the first one only made it like half hour in. Roughly.
Turns out there's lots of minutes in some of these films.
Yeah, right. Well, and my co-host and I, Travis Bowe, we picked a big one that you made mention of, and we picked the director's cut as well. We felt like that made a lot of sense as far as what the overall story that's told is very effectively told in that we felt.
We are also talking about the director's cut on this episode. That's the one that we watched. It was after actually watching that because I'd been listening to some other Movies by Minute podcasts, I thought, I'm pretty sure there's a Watchmen one out there, so I kind of went to continue the deep dive. And as I was listening to episodes, I was like, yeah, we should get one of the hosts to come on the show and talk about the movie with us, because they probably would have just living with it for as long as you guys have.
Yeah. And it would make our job easier, because then we can just, sit back and relax.
And we had been, Eric, you and I had, I think, corresponded briefly on the Minute forums, and then I was like, well, hey, I'm in contact with Eric, so let's get Eric on the show. Sucker that you were. Here you are.
Well, I mean, this is an easy little discussion here for an episode, talking for maybe roughly an hour, roughly.
Yeah, compared to, what is it, 185?
Well, the 186 minutes that we did, and roughly we were right about a half hour for each episode on average. There were plenty that were, 20 minutes or less, but there were also a few that were a little over an hour. And so that equates to what ended up being about 96 and a half hours of released recordings. So.
Now I'm curious, have you ever tried the Ultimate Cut with the Tales of the Black Freighter edited in?
Yeah, personally, I ended up watching that roughly in the middle of doing the show. It came up on Amazon Prime as being available, as did the theatrical and director's cut at that time too. Unfortunately, now they've been taken down. They weren't there that long, but since last recording and finishing with the last episodes of our movie by minute project there. I am interested in watching again. I haven't gotten around to it just yet. I've been a little busy with some other things. But watching really all three of the cuts, I'd like to do kind of in the order of theatrical, directors, and ultimate again at some point.
Unless you could get 3 screens set up, watch them all at the same time. Pause 2 when the other one's doing something different.
Well, that would have been a project to do before starting. But actually, my co-host was actually really good about some of the differences. Better than I. I'm pretty sure he had seen the Ultimate at least once or twice before we even started.
I was really curious to watch the Ultimate Cut. I have the Tales of the Black Freighter Blu-ray, but I think after watching the director's cut, I reevaluated that. It's a long movie, and to edit in like another half an hour of stuff, I'm not sure how it would blend.
Especially since it goes to cartoon format.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't know, maybe an experience for one day, but...
Well, and it would be interesting to, I think, what if you were to do what you actually kind of do, what some people do for the comic book, which is because there's all the extra prose, back matter stuff, and essentially at the end of the way the issues originally came out, the 12 issues for the graphic novel, that it would almost be interesting to, well, if you're just not into the animated parts, to just skip to the next chapter, which should be right around when I would hope when the animation ends.
There's a documentary on the Blu-ray as a second feature, which is the adaptation of the Hollis Mason tell-all book that In World his character wrote.
Mm-hmm.
Man, adding that to the end of the Ultimate Cut.
Yeah, adding even more. Yeah,
to basically be back matter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right, let's continue the discussion after I run the credits. So, Watchmen was directed by Zack Snyder. It was produced by Lawrence Gordon, Lloyd Levin, and Deborah Snyder. Screenplay was by David Hayter and Alex C. It was based on Watchmen by Dave Gibbons and Alan Moore. It starred Malin Ackerman, Billy Crudup, Matthew Good, Carla Gugino, Jackie Earle Haley, Jeffrey Dean Morgan, Patrick Wilson, and scores of other human beings. Music was by Tyler Bates, cinematography by Larry Fong. It was edited by William Hoy. It was distributed by Warner Brothers Pictures in North America, Paramount Pictures internationally, and it was released on March 6th, 2009, as previously mentioned. The film is... People have mixed feelings about the film, pretty much since the day it came out. The question that we are going to be asking today is, 10 years on, does the movie hold up? Yes or no, and why? But just before we do that, as I am wont to do, I always like to just mention what format we watched the film on. And this time, Dustin and I caught it on my Director's Cut Blu-ray, which came out in 2009 from Warner Brothers Home Video. Features on it were decent. It had the maximum movie mode with Zack Snyder. Honestly, I would have liked more considering the type of film it was, but for any fan of the film, it's definitely the way to go in my opinion, unless you want the ultimate cut, which I think might take some hunting down, but...
It did, however, answer that crucial question that the film itself posed. Who watches The Watchmen? It was us all along.
So, Eric, Watchmen, 10 years later, does it hold up, and why?
I think that the big reason I'd say yes, it does hold up, is that it has something of a timeless quality, which, I mean, you probably hear a lot or talk about a lot, because it wasn't set at the time it was made, for one.
Technically a period piece based off of that.
Yeah, right. That's a whole different animal from the way it was written by Alan Moore. It was very much of the time, yet an alternate universe time. So when I think about Watchmen and I just think about it's the very main plot, because I find it to be very, a fairly complex other things going on besides just the main plot, but the main idea of
Ozymandias' overall plan.
Yeah, creating a thing that will bring all of Earth, all of our planet, all the peoples, all the leadership and so forth together is one that, it's at least from the 60s, I'd say, we as a species, the human beings here on Earth, have had this yearning to have peace. I think peace is something that we really want in the world, yet we are often finding too many differences and so forth.
I actually remember reading that there was a president who had at one point during the Cold War had a deal with Russia where if we're invaded by aliens,
mm-hmm.
we'll team up against them. I forget which president that was.
That was a real thing?
That was a real thing.
Well, the one that actually spoke to that idea to the public, out in public, I forget on what kind of setting it was, press conference or what have you, or just kind of a general speech. But Ronald Reagan, he talked about it there in the mid 80s roughly. The idea that if the Earth ever is invaded by aliens, that will be the day when we will finally come to an agreement and have a possibly a common enemy that will help us work together.
It was Reagan and Gorbachev. They agreed.
Mm-hmm.
Shook hands on it.
I'm curious, Eric, in your guys' research, did you run across anything that stated in any way that might have influenced Moore's plot for the book?
Yeah, I wasn't familiar with that. One of the biggest bones of contention that did happen for the book, and near the end of it being written with the editor, was, and the editor left the book near the end for the last issue, or maybe two, roughly, because it came about that there was a Twilight Zone episode, The Architects of Fear, that had this. So this is going back to the late 50s or early 60s when this Twilight Zone episode aired. And then apparently there might have been even something a little earlier, a book, I believe. And it could have been a Vonnegut book, which I do love Vonnegut myself, and I would like to refigure that out. So what is the book, or what is the short story maybe that has these both of these two things had this very similar plot, but I think a lot less complexity, like I mentioned before. For the comic, it was so much more complex, and the movie kind of tried to take away that complexity a bit to be pretty interesting and have an epicness to it, similar to the book. I think Zack Snyder kept some of that complexity.
To be fair, it's a fairly simple enough idea that the enemy of my enemy is my friend sort of deal. And I know I had that thought in middle school even, that if aliens invaded, that would be the one thing that would get everyone together. The big difference being I was a little misanthrope, and I was like, I'm going to join the aliens, though.
So, should we move on to ask Dustin what he thinks? Are you comfortable with where you're at, Eric?
Oh, yeah, I'm fine.
Okay. Dustin, 10 years on. I know you've probably seen this movie more than I have.
I think I've seen it a good 3, 4, maybe 5 times. Had an ex who just adored it. And I do actually want to get back and reread the original graphic novel and see how that holds up and how that compares to the film. But my thoughts going back to it are that, yes, as a period piece, there's something that'll always have that bit of timelessness to it. It never feels dated when you're specifically told, hey, this is the place it is. And being an alternate reality, it always has a lot of extra to give some thought to, especially seeing how things have moved forward since then. How would things have gone if we added the extra 30 years that didn't exist on this film? How would things be if we had Dr. Manhattan now in this world? Looking at the alternate reality, let's extrapolate a little bit, and it gives that little bit of interest going on to it. But looking at it, and definitely from what I've read, Alan Moore doesn't seem to like superheroes. Not in the slightest bit.
I don't know about that. I mean, this story was a definite attempt to deconstruct the superhero. But I mean, Moore has gone on since Watchmen to write many superhero stories.
Doesn't mean you necessarily like it, like the concept. Or at least maybe not the way that you'll see it a lot in media. The whole Captain America running forward and doing what's right always and being lucky and everything working out for him no matter how stupid his ideas are.
Yeah, I think Moore probably would either lean more in the, like his 1963 series, like the kitschy, crazy, fun world of superheroes, or a really complicated, fantastical kind of world, like the world of his ABC characters like Promethea and Tom Strong.
What I can see a lot of, though, in The Watchmen is Zack Snyder. Zack Snyder is all over this film. Just the palette, the tone, a lot of the shots. Normally this is something that you notice, but for the first time ever, I think, I noticed it. So I'm a little proud. I got to see just pieces of a director in there. And I think while we were watching it, we were kind of thinking that if they cut out all the slow motion, the film would have been about a half hour shorter. But at the same time, I never really thought it was too much slow motion. There'd be some odd points for it, but it really became part of the film to me. What I noticed was that I didn't care much for the central two characters. It sort of followed, for the most part, Silk Spectre and Night Owl, when really they were so unimportant to the entire plot. They're pretty much running around as the plot happens around them, irrespective of anything that they do. You could say the same of Rorschach technically, but he definitely is involved more in the world around him, especially since he's the only hero who's still active, regardless of what anyone else wants.
I think Zack Snyder pulled Silk Spectre and Night Owl into it more in the film than they were perhaps in the book, because Dr. Manhattan ends up ultimately being the giant squid monster at the end from the comic books. His relationship with Laurie, her being his anchor to humanity, and then her leaving because he's just kind of drifting farther and farther away.
From that tempting Night Owl.
That plays in, I think, more with the plot of the film than just having Ozymandias off in the Arctic with his scientists and doing his thing, and then, Dr. Manhattan leaves Earth because he breaks up with Laurie, essentially. But in this one, it's folded into the batter a little bit better, a little bit more, and I think it is more significant. I wish I liked Malin Ackerman more. I might have felt a little bit more for what was going on, but I'm going to put a pin in that, talk about that one a little bit later.
Speaking of the breakup, actually, Laurie has those lines where she's talking to Manhattan and is like, you already know everything that's going to happen. Like, why are we going through these motions? You already know that I'm going to break up with you. You're breaking up with me? And she's like, ah! Do either of you feel that a little bit? Where it's like, do you know or do you not know? Like, make up your mind here, Manhattan.
Well, they do address that in the film. Like, he knows, but there's that whole inevitability, and we're all playing our roles, even Manhattan.
If anything, he would have had to have given up and not even tried to change anything at any point for that to be the case. It almost seems like a comparison to God, because God is supposed to be omniscient, yet we're supposed to have free will, so in order for that to happen, he has to also not technically know in a sense. It just becomes convoluted and doesn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense, in my mind.
Yeah, and that's something that my co-host and I, we definitely wrestled with. One of the two or three things we kind of wrestled with off and on. And it's very much, I think, a matter of things that are going to happen are supposed to happen, yet, he's able to, at points, kind of interrupt a little bit. But he can't interrupt too much either, because then it'll make the thing that happens that's supposed to happen later, this is some kind of important plot beat, essentially, not work out. So he definitely doesn't seem to have that control of what happens very well. But he knows about it, but then he needs to play along with it.
He'll act like he doesn't know about it, which brings up the question then. You have Ozymandias, who goes through all this trouble researching Dr. Manhattan's energy signature in order to block Manhattan's view of the future. If Manhattan is open about his pretty much giving up and just letting everything happen as it's going to happen, he doesn't really need to block Manhattan's vision of the future because Manhattan's going to play along with it anyway.
Well, I don't know if I agree with that.
Isn't that sort of what Manhattan said, though? We all have our part to play in.
Yeah, but Manhattan does still have some agency, and had he known that Adrian was actively creating this plot to implicate him in the deaths of millions of people, maybe he would have gone along with it, maybe he wouldn't have.
He certainly was all for it at the end. He was like, nope, that makes sense.
But that was at a point where it had happened.
Yeah, it was too late.
It had happened, and Manhattan was like, I see the logic, and it's better to just go along with what's happened and let people believe what's happened, because the outcome of any other choice is to throw the world back into chaos, and we were on the brink of extinction as it was.
Yet he would also say that if he knew what was going to happen, he would know the outcome and be like, oh, actually, this is kind of the best plan, so yeah, let's go for it.
That is entirely possible.
He'd play along with it, and he'd act as though he didn't know about it until Ozymandias sort of told him the plan at the end, and he'd fake his surprise. He might even just walk up and say, now's when you tell us your whole plan. But it doesn't matter because it's already happened, and everyone would say, wait, what?
But that's why I said that he may or may not have gone along with it, but I think Adrian just wasn't going to take that chance.
That much I can agree with.
One similar thing that happens earlier in the movie with the death of just one person versus all these millions is the Vietnamese lady that comedian has apparently impregnated, and kills. Comedian kills her, and he says to Dr. Manhattan, you could have saved her life. You could have made his gun or bullets, I forget which, into snowflakes or something, I believe. Yeah,
Manhattan chastises him for killing her, and then he's like, well, what did you do about it?
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, oh, you're right.
Touche, good sir, touche.
I guess I'll jump in here with my does it hold up answer, since
I'll actually state as to whether or not I think it holds up at the end in the summary.
Oh.
I'll just talk about it in the meantime.
I had a mixed sort of feeling about the film when I saw it originally in the theater, and so I was really curious to revisit it. I found that I have mixed feelings about the movie to this day, but those mixed feelings have changed somewhat, because I think the movie, on a technical level, really holds up. Like, the effects still hold up, the visuals still hold up, the costumes still hold up, despite the fact that superheroes are now, we've got like 20 superhero shows on TV and how many movies every year and whatever. This movie does continue to have its identity, and it doesn't fall away as, oh, well, that's an artifact of 10 years ago, and we do things differently now, and whatever.
And it doesn't blend in with 20 other superhero movies, which all feel pretty much the same at this point.
Yeah, which I really appreciate. And I was even really interested, because I am a fan of Man of Steel, and I have an appreciation for Batman vs. Superman, and what he was trying to do with the DC Universe movies, even though Warner Brothers ended up truncating that and doing what they did. So I was really curious to go back and see sort of an early superhero effort from Snyder. I feel like there was a very young filmmaker who was making this movie. I feel like there are things that Snyder was doing that he probably wouldn't do today. And that sounds like a duh moment, because of course he would do things somewhat differently, but you know how you just look at something and you see certain choices, or maybe he's being a little bit too slavishly in adhering to what the comic book was trying to do, whereas now I think he might be a little bit more interpretive about it, rather than I'm going to try and make this like panel for panel. And so that was really interesting for me, is seeing a much younger filmmaker doing something. But a lot of the problems I had with the movie back in 2009, I mentioned I do not like Malin Ackerman's performance. I still have problems with Matthew Good. I think Matthew Good is actually a fine actor. I've seen him in other films, and I'm perfectly fine with him. But
Matthew Good was
Ozymandias. But there's something about Ozymandias, something in that performance which I feel like Ozymandias in the comic book had more presence than Adrian Veidt does in the movie.
In the movie, he feels like he's super depressed, like he's almost given up on a lot of things. Sort of, he knows what he's got to do, and he already feels terrible about it. It really shows, of course, in a scene where he lets Night Owl just beat the crap out of him a little bit, because he's going to feel every single death. But I actually appreciated a lot of the acting in this. I even appreciated him. I absolutely loved Jackie Earle Haley, and everything he did as Rorschach in this, something I didn't necessarily remember from my first viewing, just as I didn't remember the length of the film from the first viewing.
Yeah, Jackie Earle Haley, he really owns that.
Oh, he's fantastic. Everything he says, especially during the interview in the prison with the psychiatrist, where he's trying to play him a little bit, what he sees, and eventually sort of giving the psychiatrist the cold, unfettered truth. Like, I love his speeches, and I love how his character is so uncompromising. He's damn near the best role model of anyone in the film.
But at the same time, even though he's personally my favorite character as a character, but not for what he really represents, which is, I mean, he has these things that he'll say at points are not my way of thinking, that's for sure.
They're definitely a little grimdark.
Yeah.
So I kind of brought up the cast, and we're kind of talking about the cast. So let's continue on this train of thought. Clearly, we all love Jackie Earle Haley. How do we feel about the other members? How do we feel about Billy Crudup and Patrick Wilson, Carla Gugino, Stephen McHattie? Who am I missing? Matthew Good.
Matthew Frewer.
Oh yeah, Matt Frewer's in this as well, and Jeffrey Dean Morgan, of course, as the comedian. Eric, we'll let you jump in first.
Especially since I don't know half of those actors and their roles.
Yeah, and so many of the actors and how they portrayed those characters are, from the guests we had on and Travis's and my own thoughts, seemingly are all very much highly regarded. And so many of them pretty new and fresh on the scene. I mean, not too much by any one of them except for, say, Matt Frewer or Jackie Earle Haley going back to Bad News Bears.
Yeah.
But Carla Gugino is pretty big for Zack Snyder, working with him, and she's apparently done some other things I haven't even seen that are much lauded, and that in the way that character she's doing that character both when she's younger side and mainly like during the wonderful credit scene, long multiple scenes really. A lot of these actors are really I'm very, very good with, but the couple you mentioned are ones that we certainly did talk about a good bit. Matthew Good and Malin Ackerman.
I really liked Carla Gugino's Silk Spectre. Like, I like Carla Gugino as an actor, and I liked her portrayal of Silk Spectre 1 in the flashbacks quite a bit, actually. I really thought she really fit. But her portrayal as elderly Sally, it was one of those, like, Guy Pearce in Prometheus kind of moments where sometimes the aging makeup just really doesn't sell it. And I kind of felt like she was going for a somewhat stereotypical old person kind of portrayal. There was something about, both of the Jupiter women that were just really hit and miss with me.
To me, the elder Silk Spectre, her entire character is summed up in her line where the older you get, the darker the future seems, but the brighter the past was. And it cleans out all the dirt and grime. And that, to me, says so much in the film. That's like 30 minutes worth of film condensed into one phrase.
And I feel that the writing of those characters is actually good. I'm just not sold on all of the performances personally. And I think, like I said, back in 2009, these were some of the things that stood out to me. But yeah, I do like the character of Sally and the complexity of her relationship with her manager and her relationship with her daughter and her relationship with her lover, which takes us nicely into Jeffrey Dean Morgan as the comedian, which I think he does sell the younger and the older versions of the character. I think Jeffrey Dean Morgan really embodied that character.
Yeah.
And I wish these were some of the things where I feel that, like when I was saying Zack Snyder being a young director taking on this enormous project and trying to stick very closely to the comic book, I'm not sure he hit the The point where you've got the comedian in Moloch's bedroom having his breakdown moment, I remember feeling that a lot more. It was more impactful in the comic book than it was in the movie, and I don't think that was Jeffrey Dean Morgan's performance. I think that was just like an editing or a pacing thing in the film. I don't know. What do you guys think of that?
Well, one thing that we pointed out on the show was that there's something you can do with the panel by panel layout of the comic that as much as Zack Snyder replicates so much of the comic panel wise in an amazing way, I think. But that is one case where we didn't get quite the same feel for it because in the comic and the panel by panel situation, from one panel to the next, we have this blinking light essentially that's kind of happening. So you kind of have this. I feel like you have this back and forth, two sides of people, kind of coming through, and the coloring of the room being lit up by this blinking light outside Moloch's bedroom, I believe. I think that could have been replicated, but it was chosen not to for some reason, and I think it's a shame.
And I do wonder sometimes if those choices were production cost choices or pacing choices, or I don't know.
I feel like that could be a much more of a pacing choice. It's you can read what's in a balloon and the words in the balloon in the comic. You can read what's going on in one panel with the one light being on, and then when it goes away and you read this other stuff, and to have that, it would have been a really crazy timing. Try to get the timing down, and I don't think it would have worked as well as it does if they had tried that versus just not trying it and just showing this other thing happening. I think the thing there happening, I think, is the tear coming off out of his tear duct in his eye, down his face, down his chin, and then changing to a blood drop that's splattering. I think, I forget where, splattering on the button, maybe.
Right.
Quite possibly.
Do you have any feelings about Jeffrey Dean Morgan, Dustin?
I didn't feel that there was that much of a difference between his old and younger characters. Of course, you have the breakdown point where he's completely different, but the comedian was always sort of a facade, and that's sort of what he's always been. So it's only when the facade breaks down that he's another character at all, that he's whoever's behind him. I did appreciate him and the role that he had, though I think that it's ridiculous that he punched through his stone fireplace there.
That's another one of the things that irks me about the film and has irked me for 10 years. The apparent level of superpowers that most of these heroes seem to have. I'm not that far into the Minute show so far. Have you guys discussed this, Eric?
Oh yeah. I think Travis, he kind of termed it with like at least partially the word hyper. It's something that Zack Snyder, I believe, chose to do, or someone else, I don't know, or it's a group choice, to give all these people that in the book sure as heck aren't supposed to. It's never implied anywhere or anything in the book, at least, that and there's no reason for any of these characters in the movie either to have these
minus Manhattan, of course.
Slightly strengths.
Well, that's the whole point of Manhattan, is that Manhattan is the superpowered character.
Right, exactly.
I will say, though, that for all the crazy tosses and punches and whatnot that other characters do, Rorschach seems to be fairly realistic in what he does.
Mm-hmm.
He has a couple tools. He uses his tools to good effect, but he's not throwing 300-pound guys through plate glass windows. He's not punching through stones.
That's an interesting observation, because for the most violent, psychotic, driven character who probably doles out, or should dole out, the most violence in the film, he is portrayed the most realistically. And I mean, you've got Night Owl and Silk Spectre 2, Night Owl 2 and Silk Spectre 2 in that alley fight, and like they're outright killing dudes.
With a single punch, they're just snapping through bone like it's paper tissue. And this is supposed to be a flabby guy who hasn't done any crime fighting in how long?
But yeah, you watch Rorschach in just about any scene that he has, either with like the child killer or in the prison, and he's so grounded.
There are just the two instances, I would say, and the one is actually very general. It seems like acrobatics for him, his like jumping capability more so, and there is the jump for Ozymandias near the end too. But then the other thing that for Rorschach, the one instance where he gets thrown there at the end, and he really seems to get up pretty easily. I mean, there's a little bit of a head shake, I just got thrown against a big stone block, which probably should have broken my neck, that happening. But
and there you could, in theory, claim adrenaline at that point if you really wanted to.
Yeah.
Have we pretty much covered everybody?
Haven't really covered Night Owl 1.
Yeah, Stephen McHattie, I liked his portrayal of Hollis Mason, but I mean, he doesn't play the young Night Owl 1.
Right. That's true.
So, I don't know, there's kind of a divide there. I actually dig the outfit for actually all of the Minutemen from the 40s. Their outfits, like, it's one of the things I love the movie for, like the attention to detail in the set design and the costuming. They actually set out, when they made these 40s costumes, they were like, we want to make them the way they would have been made at the time. They wanted them to look like costumes, not like the way we do superhero costumes now. So the fabrics that they used and the designs that they used, there was like a silliness to them and a innocence and a joie de vivre, and I don't know, there's just something so super charming about pretty much all of them. Like even the comedians, like clown outfit and
the silly noose hanging around the hanged man.
Oh,
he must be so happy no one ever just grabbed onto it and gave it a yank.
I do feel that between the comic and the movie, the design put into the Minutemen's outfits, costumes, I feel like that was a really good nod to just what mainly DC during that time frame, what those costumes were like from the 40s, from the earliest days of the superhero comics. There's a lot of similarities there, I think. And yeah, that's a very valid point that I think we come up with near the end of the movie, when we finally get Ozymandias himself in his suit, not as Adrian Veidt, the businessman. And there are these nods there to like the Schumacher Batman, with the nipples showing.
Yeah.
And Night Owl's outfit as well. I mean, it's fairly Batman-esque as well, and that has that.
Maybe a bit more Adam West Batman, but Batman nonetheless.
Oh no, he's talking about the
earlier Night Owl, I think, is more of a nod to the Adam West. Yeah, I could see that too.
I was poking fun at his belly.
Yes.
Whether it's the Tim Burton Batman or even into the Christopher Nolan Batman, I think that suit for Night Owl fits in pretty well as a middle ground in there too.
I do miss that owl shape to the head though. That was something that I was trying to figure out the entire time I'm watching the movie. I'm like, why does Night Owl 2 look just a little bit off to me? And then I saw an image of Dave Gibbons' Night Owl 2 design, and he has that cowl, that thing in the back that widens the neck.
Did the comic at all had like feathers around the head or the neck? I seem to have a memory of that, but I construct memories all the time.
Feathered. I think it was just a shaped sort of headpiece. But seeing Patrick Wilson's neck, I think, and his head in like full proper shape really threw me. Otherwise, I actually kind of dig the costume.
Going to something else entirely, you'd mentioned earlier the intro sequence. That is probably one of the most fantastic intro sequences I've ever seen. It sets such a stage and gives you such a mood to enter the film with. A lot of their sort of time-lapse, here's stuff that happened, Manhattan and Vietnam.
Right.
Those scenes, every single one of them, as far as I'm concerned, is perfect.
Yeah,
I didn't realize until I was listening to your Minute show, the Watchmen Minute, that first Night Owl crime that he stops is the Wayne murder.
Right. Oh, yeah.
And then I went back and looked at it, and there's like the Batman posters on the wall, and it's Thomas and Martha Wayne, and yeah.
Yeah, it does have those little head nods, too, that don't quite make a lot of sense, but it's telling the story that, this could have been the DC universe, but this is really, which isn't our universe either.
Yeah, it is those vignettes, they're really well produced. Like, I love the guy who's burning himself. Like, that wasn't news footage, that was that was recreated on the stage that was done for the film, the Kennedy assassination, like all those things were filmed for the film. I love how they were made and how well they were made, and I love how it's executed in the credits. I think that's what I'm trying to say. Because like you said, I think it tells an amazing 30-odd year span of time, and it really puts you in the world of the film.
But in the one vignette, there's one detail that kind of sticks out for me. I appreciate a mainstream film that will show a dong, because it's always been very uneven. You'll see lots of T, lots of A, but not very much D. But when he's taking out everyone in Vietnam, they were like, hey, Mr. Manhattan, could you please make yourself a cod piece? Because we don't need to see that.
I was going to tell you that, I don't know if you've noticed, Dustin, but everybody hangs a little uneven, so...
I don't know if they were worried about jealousy, but he's naked every time except for that.
Well, and something hopefully you would do a reread of the comic, but a big thing there that I certainly noticed in reading the book 2 or 3 times probably before the movie came out, over the few years before the movie came out, is that through time he is actually wearing less and less clothes.
Yeah.
So there's a point earlier on before Vietnam where he has more of a black leotard type thing, is what he's made for himself, or if it's actually something he puts on. That's up for debate, I think. And then he does actually get dressed up for the TV interview that occurs there in the mid-80s when he freaks out.
That much he would.
It's very much like you, Dustin. When you go out into the world, you make sure that you're clothed head to toe, but as you come home and start to relax, you care less and less what people think.
Until it's underwear, socks, and housecoat.
and I start to avoid your space more and more.
Which doesn't work too well, because my space is in between your room and the kitchen.
I wanted to address, for me, one of the triumphs of the film and one of the pitfalls of the film is Snyder's slavish adherence to the graphic novel. And I mean, this is a 12-issue series. Eric said right off the top that it's a complicated story. There's like an A, B, C, D, and E plot running. There might even be an F and a G, especially if you're counting the Tales of the Black Freighter. I mean, it's a 185, 186 minute movie, and there's a lot there. And I think Snyder gets a lot in there, both visually and story-wise. But the pacing of a comic is not necessarily what the pacing of a film maybe should be. Right. I'm curious to see what the HBO series will do, because I almost feel like had they split the film up into sections and released it like as a TV series, I think it would have been spooled over like 12 episodes, like beautifully.
It's funny how there's a certain point where you have too many stories, so you either want to cut them back or have more, but you're somewhere stuck in the middle.
But also, the first, I think, hour of the film is the first issue and a half of the series, or first 2 issues of the series. And then the comedian, spoilers for anybody who doesn't know, the comedian and Ozymandias fight in the apartment right off the bat, originally told in flashback. And I think you guys even said on your podcast that you almost would have preferred to have had the detectives talking and to have flashed back the way the comic book did. I think that would have been cool myself, but I mean, Snyder was clearly making some choices where he was like, okay, we can't do everything like the comic book, but then he'd make the choices to do things exactly like the comic book, and I was always a little confounded at where he would choose to do it and where he would not choose to do it. And as a result, that's one of the mixed feelings I have about the movie, is that I think it's paced challengingly, and I wondered what you guys thought of the pacing and its adherence to the comic book structure, all of that junk. Go.
Well, and one thing I had to point out at one point throughout the minutes episodes that we did is that the funeral scene is going on for quite a while, but what's happening during it is all these flashbacks. It's going into Manhattan's mind and giving you some things that happened earlier in his life, a couple different points, and same for Night Owl and others there. Ozymandias, I believe. But the idea of with the 12 issues, it would almost have been nice if there had been 2 movies that it would have actually been then split up within the 2 movies into 3 sections, similar to Kill Bill, say, or other Tarantino movies, where he does have chapters within movies, sections that have certain titles and different things going on in them.
Which means you're probably a fan of the idea of turning it into a TV show.
Yes. I'm very much looking forward to it, and it's the whole idea of it being a remix, I think, is a fine way to put it. It seems somewhat sequel-ish, but to the book, not a sequel to the movie.
What did you think of the pacing, Dustin? I know in the process of watching it, you kept like, is it almost over? Is it still going?
The thing is, like, I'd always remember a certain number of major scenes. It's all the interstitial stuff that I seem to have forgotten and how long a lot of that takes. And on one hand, I don't know necessarily what would be cut. On the other hand, it feels incomplete and too long. I think it's just there's too much to work with. And yeah, just in a movie format, what do you do with all of that? Especially when you're trying to create moods with slow motion and just sort of let us soak in some ambiance every so often. It's hard to figure out exactly where the pacing was bad necessarily. But at the end of the day,
I think when Eric pointed out the funeral, I think the funeral is one of the worst paced parts of the movie, because after like the second flashback, it's like, oh geez, we're still here. This is still going on. And by the time the funeral ends, sort of the emotional impact of it and the tension of it, in my opinion, what you're left with is, oh look, that's Rorschach walking out in the rain.
I did pay attention, and I saw Rorschach in a whole number of scenes, which I always appreciate on a second viewing of something.
But I do think the information that was imparted in those flashbacks is important.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly, that's the problem. Is it a pacing issue, or is it that they had to put that information somewhere else?
And this is where I feel the movie is triumphant in the fact that Snyder included a lot of stuff that a lot of people would have cut out.
And may I point out here that the one biggest thing that he didn't include was related to the end, the change in the end. Instead of being the squid in the comic book, you can put a spoiler warning in editing just before that if you wish. But
I think I already dropped the squid.
Yeah, you definitely already mentioned Dr. Manhattan, his role. And the whole thing with this alien squid idea was there was stuff going on an island with and the comedian even referenced that to when he's there at on Moloch's bed. He saw this list and stuff like that, and these various people, these artists and scientists and different people that somehow had this role in creating this fake alien squid. So with that plot change, it gets rid of, it means the movie could be a lot shorter than the 5 or 6 hour thing it could have been, maybe.
And I would have liked the mystery. I would have liked the mystery that would have created, because that would have created some added tension where you're kind of wondering, like, mm-hmm. Okay, there's something lurking in the background.
Yeah.
But that's just one more plot line to kind of stick in there and make sure you weave it in with everything else. And ultimately, after the film, like Dustin and I discussed, the use of Dr. Manhattan. I know it's controversial. A lot of people hate it, but it's that thing where they basically gave John a role that he didn't sort of have previously. Like, there were choices that had to be made. It was a character that you were already invested in. It made sense. It fit with the themes of the film, and I respect and appreciate using Manhattan as a scapegoat in the film. And I like having Manhattan go, I'm okay with it. I was going to leave the universe anyways.
There's nothing really for me here.
Yeah.
I'm just going to go be God somewhere else.
And the squid monster would have been millions of dollars. Having to weave that storyline in, it's
yet another storyline that would have been crammed in a weird way where we're talking about the bad pacing of it.
Yeah, and that's totally something that I don't mind being cut. They actually do, again, I'm not sure if you guys covered this in your minutes, but when Manhattan is communicating with Adrian over the view screen, I suppose, you see the reactor machine in the background, and there's an acronym on the machine that spells squid.
Oh, yeah.
And it stands for something. But that was Zack Snyder's acknowledgement that, hey, this is the squid. Okay, one more thing I have about the film that I didn't mind in 2009, but actually kind of got under my skin this time around. Its use of pop songs. We talked about pop songs prior to recording, but going from Unforgettable immediately into The Times They Are Changing, I was like, whoa, we're in Suicide Squad territory here. This is this is two songs too close together. And then the use of Hallelujah seemed... I mean, I didn't love it in 2009, but it felt even more conspicuous this time around. How did you guys feel about the music in the film? And you can even talk about like Tyler Bates's orchestrations as well, not just the pop songs.
Well, I think there's a fair amount of good, a little bit of bad for both the pop rock music that was used as well as the score. For the score, there's one part where it's kind of like almost like a bad 80s guitar riff that's kind of happening at a couple points. And then for the soundtrack, the pop music, we came to terms with Hallelujah, I think. We found out a lot of background information kind of how I think Snyder, he did a little, screening with some fellow professionals, friends, what have you, and other ideas that they was considering. I think that turns out to have been one of the best options. Despite, I personally love the when it came about in the late 90s, especially when I came across it, the Jeff Buckley cover of Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah. But it kind of did get beat to death. Other covers and so forth for Shrek and what have you, and the Jeff Buckley version being used in a lot of different shows.
I don't even question like Snyder's choice of songs necessarily. It's his choice of how he used them. Like, he uses the entirety of Unforgettable. He uses the entirety of The Times They Are Changing. I think The Times They Are Changing is essential for that opening credit sequence, I think.
Yeah. That much I'll agree with. The issue I have with pop songs in general when they're used in films is that it tends to just overshadow everything else. In the intro, using The Times They Are Changing, you're doing a clip show, so there's no dialogue that it's going over. It's just, here's a bunch of things happening, and the theme of it is The Times They Are Changing, so it all works out. But you start talking Hallelujah, Unforgettable, all of a sudden the entire scene is now based around that song. You're stopping the show, here's a musical number. It's the issue I tend to have with musicals. It's not necessarily advancing the plot, you're just pausing to listen to music for a little bit.
Would you have preferred the one I liked the best, and I actually ended up using the normal version, because really I couldn't even find this, it's a Muzak version of Everybody Wants to Rule the World in Adrian Veidt, Ozymandias' lobby in his building. And so it's in the background. You could barely hear it at points, Other points you can't hear it at all, but I'm assuming it's going on because it picks up, it fades out a little bit, but then you kind of start to hear it a little bit again. Would you have been better with that kind of a cover, of a light background cover of some of these other pop songs in those spots? It would have taken away, I think, that fault you find in it.
100%.
Don't you think? Yeah.
That's one of the things that I like about your usual soundtrack music, is that it's something that sort of accentuates, creates a mood, but if it's doing its job right, you don't notice it, but it has its effect on you.
I know this is total armchair quarterbacking. I mean, that's pretty much the definition of our show anyways. Or pretty much any podcast. But I believe the term is like diegetic music.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Unforgettable was playing on the television for the advertisement. It goes from being a song on the television to being the underscore of the fight. And I feel like had it stayed in world, had it been in the background on the television, I still don't think I would have played the entire song out. I almost would have maybe like destroyed the television in the fight.
Right, yeah.
If you were going to like play the whole thing, I would still have preferred to hear it coming from the television in the background, mixed in with all of the crashing and the Wallace sounds, the oofs and the punches and the whatever. Because for me, the biggest problem is you have that, the last few bars of Unforgettable come to a close, the strings come to their conclusion, and there's a heartbeat, and then Bob Dylan's guitar kicks in. You know, it almost feels like you're listening to the soundtrack and the CD has just moved on to another track, or your 5-disc changer has moved on.
You're watching The Wizard of Oz as a Dark Side of the...
Yeah. So that was kind of my main problem with it. And then, I mean, Snyder loves music. Snyder uses music in all of his movies, and Snyder was a music video director. I mean, I think all of those things play into it. I think I don't even mind so much that the music is so on the nose. Like you mentioned the Tears for Fears music. I mean, what are you going to play in Adrian Veidt's place? Everybody Wants to Rule the World. That's kind of hitting the nail on the head. But if it's not at the forefront, then it's just this... It's like an Easter egg. It's something that is playing, and you recognize it, and you're like, okay, that's of the period, and that's good. And then you go, oh, wait, that's that song. Oh, and it's in his... Oh, that makes so much sense. So yeah, I have a complicated relationship with his use of the music, and I know, Dustin, you don't often notice music, but I thought you mentioned early on in the conversation that there were things you were noticing you don't usually notice, and I think the music is so...
In your face.
In your face, yeah. I was... And Eric, I know Eric has probably talked about it at length over the last year.
I think now would be a good time to slide into final thoughts and deliberation.
Okay. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you want to cover, Eric?
I think I'm okay, yeah. I mean, it's yeah.
I was going to make a joke like, are you sure we're not letting you talk about Watchmen? Do you really want to talk more about Watchmen? Because, you know, if you don't have enough opportunities to talk about Watchmen, we don't want to... All right, well, I guess let us move into final thoughts and wrap up kind of our conversation here.
Out of my way. People have to be told.
You know I can't let you do that.
Suddenly you discover humanity. Convenient. If you'd cared from the start, none of this would have happened.
I can change almost anything. But I can't change human nature.
Of course you must protect Veidt's new utopia. What's one more body amongst foundations? What are you waiting for? Do it.
We ended with me last time, so I will start this time. Again, complicated relationship with this movie. I equal parts love and have problems with this movie. That's a perfect recipe for me for revisiting something. I definitely watch movies that I'm trying to sort of figure out, you know, what went wrong or what I don't like about it or what I would do better. I visit movies I don't like way more than I visit movies that I like. So I will definitely revisit it, and I've done a lot more kind of a deep dive, listening to your podcast, Eric, and, you know, just diving into my own stuff and some of the comic books, and really kind of thinking about the film and the themes and what Snyder was kind of trying to do, and I went through all the bonus features, and I think going back into it, because I went into it this time really cold. It was just literally, I haven't seen this movie probably in 7 years, so will I like it more than I did previously? I'm kind of interested in the fact that things I didn't like, I do like, and things that I didn't, or I did like, I no longer like, and then things have just sort of changed, and it's still a complicated relationship for me. I still think the movie holds up. My issues are things in the execution, things in some of the performances, but I think the movie still looks great. I still think it's an achievement. So, yeah, that's my position. Dustin?
One of the things that I feel is always a black mark on any sort of media is if while enjoying it, while watching, while listening, whatever, you're sitting there like, man, this is long. I have 26-minute long tracks that I can listen to, and at the end of it be like, I never once during that felt this was going on too long. Or I could listen to a 3-minute song where it's like, stop repeating your freaking chorus for 2 seconds. God, end already. Yeah, so watching this film, there was a lot of times in it where I'm like, man, what time is it? This is going on pretty long. And you were saying the same thing as we were watching it. It has that problem where you are noticing the time. And there is the other issues with the pop music that sort of will jump out at you for too long, not caring too much about who are effectively the two central characters throughout far too much of the film. But there's so much that is fantastic. Anything that has to do with Jackie Earle Haley's performance. So many of the themes going on. A lot of the nuance in so many performances. As you said, the effects, a lot of stuff, it all still holds up. The grand summation of all that is that it doesn't add up to masterpiece, but it is something that is definitely worth a view. You just got to know what you're getting into before you get into it, that you're getting into a bit more of an artsy hero story, and that you better bring a diaper and a snack because you're going to be there for a while.
I just saw today for Avengers Endgame a licensed version, fake, I'm sure, of a diaper for it because of its running time.
That's why we do all our recording on the toilet.
Because its runtime is the same as this director's cut, but the theatrical cut of this is less than this newest and most fabulous possibly end of a 22 movie run.
Yeah. I'm actually curious to revisit the theatrical cut of Watchmen just because if so many of my issues were pacing issues.
Yeah, right.
I wonder if the theatrical cut would feel truncated or if it would feel just leaner. I'm not really sure. Eric, your final thoughts on the film?
Your initial question of timeless, I think I hope I made that clear that I'm pretty sure it's, to me at least, I believe it to be timeless. And while I don't think it's necessarily, it's certainly not my favorite movie. I mean, it's high up there. It's, top 30. And a lot of that's really coming from the book. I mean, the book is like my favorite, maybe 1 or 2 or 3 at the most, of all comics I've ever read. Mainly when you're talking about comics of a collected original graphic novel version. There could be a single issue here or there that really hits me even deeper than something like this. But I totally understand, there's all kinds of lovers and haters of all kinds of things, whether it's, for me, the number one movies for me really is Star Wars, and that's why I'm as geeky as I am and love all this other stuff. If that hadn't happened the way it did for me as a kid, then I very possibly wouldn't love movies as much as I do. It's a matter of, for me, the basic story, but then with the complexities that are there, the basic story I think is just pretty valuable. It's not something to be taken lightly, and you can go on, I think, for many more hours about the state of the world and the way it was there in the 80s and the way it is now.
There are movies, the Alien Minute guys just started doing Alien 3.
Right.
And Alien 3 is a movie which, since way back in 92, I've always recognized its faults, but they've never bothered me. They've been points for discussion or for, researching, watching behind the scenes stuff and realizing why things were the way that they were, but it never took away from the enjoyment of the film for me. So I was wondering if that was just like a similar experience for you, where Watchmen was one of those movies where you knew that maybe there's a performance or something that you didn't care for, or this plot bit or whatever, but just the piece as a whole was just a meaty enough sort of experience for you, and bringing the comic book to life as it has was maybe enough, satisfying enough.
Yeah, and I hope in the next full normal watch, come away with less of loving it. There's been other movies by minute shows where, as they have been watching the movie minute by minute and get to the end, that they really don't like the movie anymore.
Right.
And that's definitely not the case here. If anything, I think I enjoy it a little bit better. I will enjoy it a little bit better. I got to know it that much more. And, I do have an upcoming other movie by minute, and then even further ideas after that, too. And it's a matter of not necessarily going into a movie that you absolutely love,
Yeah.
but a movie that you like well enough that you want to learn more.
Yeah. Well, at the very least, I mean, it is a movie that creates conversation.
Yeah.
You know, there are movies that I love and movies that I hate that I would talk less about than I have for this film. And honestly, I know some people love the Marvel movies, but other than a small handful, I probably couldn't fill an hour of conversation talking about them because they just...
Maybe all
In
of
my
them
opinion-
in one. If you start talking about all 22 films.
In my opinion, like at a certain point, they all sort of became the same movie and the same story, and everything just sort of blended and they lost their individual identities. But, you know, sit me down with Winter Soldier. I'll take up your whole evening. All right, well, let's wrap it up. Eric, do you have anything that you want to pimp?
Well, yeah, so, I mean, Watchmen Minute itself, you can just Google that and find our one website, and I can tell you that, too, realpodcastnetwork.com/Watchmen Minute. You know, we have our various social media, you know, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, which hopefully you can find. As I was saying, the next Movies by Minutes that should appear later in the fall this year of 2019 is Almost Famous Minute, where I'm hosting on my own, except, you know, essentially I almost always have two guests, and one that I feel makes more sense than the other will essentially be my co-host for, you know, whether it's just all the way down just to one episode or maybe a couple weeks worth at a time sometimes.
Now, are you doing Almost Famous or Untitled?
I'm doing Almost Famous, and actually the gentleman I was actually first in contact with about it, he suggested the theatrical cut, and especially since I'm doing the hosting duties and really the editing duties even more so on my own. It's instead of a Monday through Friday that Star Wars Minute kind of really made the way to do it, right. Except for we have certainly gotten a lot of variation from that. That's the way the Watchmen Minute was, Monday through Friday release schedule. This will be a Monday, Wednesday, Friday release schedule.
I almost failed geography because of Almost Famous.
No? Okay. How was that?
Story for another time.
Need it now.
I don't know how much recording time we have left here, so... All right. That was our thoughts on 2009's Watchmen. If you guys have anything that you want to add or any comments on our discussion or on the fact that Dustin spends his evenings in a state of casual undress, feel free to...
I'll have you know I am fully clothed and wearing a coat right now. Only probably because I'm going to be heading out to give an insulin injection to a cat right after.
All right. Feel free to hit us up on Facebook, on Twitter, on all the social media. Just search for Your Consideration on Facebook. You'll find us. On Twitter, we are at FYC Show. We are... God, I don't even know if we're FYC Show... I think we're FYC Show on Instagram, fycshowmail@gmail.com if you want to send us an email.
Find one of us and we're linked to every other one of us. Also,
kind
we're
of.
right behind you right now.
Also, if you go to fycshow.wordpress.com, in the sidebar there is kind of like all the social media and all the places that you can find us as well. If you want to support the show, you know, share on your social media, tell other people about the show. If you want to support the show in a slightly more robust way, we do have the Patreon, patreon.com/FYC Show. We have some reward levels there that I think are not half bad, so check those out. What are we doing next week? Is it my pick next week? I think it is my pick.
I believe it is your pick. Or were we doing...
No, actually, it is your pick, and we are going to be doing Idiocracy, the Mike Judge film.
There you go.
There you go. So check us out next week if you want to hear Idiocracy, and if not, there will be another movie after that. Eric, thank you so much for joining us on this show.
Thank you.
It's always great to have a guest. It's always great to have a third point of view. We'll be sure to check out the Almost Famous Minute when it comes out, and I will continue trudging through... Trudging is such a negative word. I will continue venturing through, endeavoring through the Watchmen Minute. I think I'm about 16 or 17 minutes in right now, so all the best to you, and to everybody else, we will catch you on the flip side. I've been your host, Mike Josick.
And I've been your other host, Dustin Friesenhan.
And I've been Eric Nash.
Thanks so much.
We'll continue to be all of the respective versions of ourselves.
Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you next time on For Your Consideration. Take care.
It's a joke. It's all a joke.